Okay. So now we just finished the sutra chanting. Then we would like to start have two speakers for today's session. So we would like to have Dr. Kamera Zenshin Haberana as the first speaker. So before she starts talking, let me briefly introduce Kamera-san or Dr. Kamera. So Kamera Zenshin Haberana is a psychiatrist and then Jodo Shinshu Buddhist priest. She received her medical degree in 1982, trained at the Ohio State University hospitals, and was board certified in psychiatry, child, adolescent, and then adult in 1993. She has been in private practice since. She's married to Reverend Jerry Kiyoshi Hirano, Jodo Shinshu Buddhist priest, who is also the current director of the Center for Buddhist Education, Buddhist Churches of America, BCA. And he is also head minister of 4 Nishi Hongwanji temples in the Western US. So Dr. Kamera-san studied at the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley, California, received academic certification for Kyoshi, which is the kind of certification in the Jodo Shinshu Hongwanji-ha tradition. And then also she received the Tokudo ordination in Kyoto, Japan in 2014. Her Nembutsu path was revealed when a personal crisis in 1999 opened her foolish mind to her unconditional compassion of Amida Buddha. So so Kamera-san, I think, please start your speech. Thank you.
Okay, is this okay? Do I turn on put the volume up? This is good. Okay, thank you so much for having me. Okay, so this is just the title slide. Basically, I thought that the flowers look really good as a sign of impermanence, but also health and wellness before they droop. My tradition is Jodo Shinshu, as you know, Pure Land. And the teachings of the Nembutsu have been guiding my medical practice in psychiatry now for, maybe more than 10 years now. So my presentation has to do more with just a little glimpse of how the Nembutsu teachings can show us a path to health and wellness. Oops. Hang on. Okay. So this is the Buddha Amida, and the kanji says Namo Amida Butsu, which means I take refuge in the Buddha of infinite wisdom and compassion. So the word Nembutsu, or more accurately, Nenbutsu, literally translates to thinking on the Buddha or truth itself. It is the form in which Amida Buddha makes himself available and accessible to ordinary human beings to wake up the ignorant mind to the amazing manifestations of the Buddha's compassion, especially in times of illness and struggle. So Namo Amida Butsu is our articulation, our recitation of the Buddha's name in recognition and gratitude for his infinite wisdom and compassion. It also means that I, the ordinary human being, foolish being we call Bombu, take refuge, and I think that's a key word, is refuge, because I have nowhere to go to escape my illness and misery in Amida Buddha. And Amida is broken into two origins. A is no, or negation, and Mida is the Sanskrit word for meter or measure. So therefore, Amida means immeasurable, Buddha, or truth of wisdom, as manifested by Seishi Bodhisattva and compassion, Kanon Bodhisattva. So when you see images of the three Buddhas, that's typically Amida Buddha, Seishi, and Kanon Bodhisattvas. I have tried to explain this to my patients, especially my non-Buddhist patients. And the emphasis is to take refuge, which requires trust in the process of healing. And I assume that they come to see me because somewhere in their minds and hearts, they trust that I might be able to help them. So as no one is exempt from illness and suffering, patients seek medical care, mostly when they could no longer bear the pain of their illness and suffering. This is probably why our medical care here in the US is typically addressed towards illness and not so much wellness. That we address patients in this country only when they're sick, but when they're fine, we don't hear about them. So trusting that there is recovery or cure for illness, in my mind, is commensurate to trusting that there are scientific and medical interventions which can alleviate illness. For example, I tell my patients who are hesitant on taking antidepressant medication, I tell them that medication is also a concrete form of compassion. And if you are suffering greatly, then there is no point in my mind to prolong your misery. Let's get right to it and let's medicate this. It is also trusting in the natural process of how organisms, living organisms, at least on this planet, always strive to return to balance. And so in medicine, we call that term homeostasis, or returning to balance. To me, this is consistent with the Buddhist universal ethic of compassion, as explained in the Abhidharma. The Buddha's compassion is there because illness and suffering are there. In this sense, human suffering and the alleviation of suffering coexist and are not mutually separate from each other. In my mind, this is also how Namo Amida Butsu plays an integral part in my own medical practice. When a suffering patient is here, Amida Buddha is also here. My role as a physician is joining with the patient in trusting the Buddha's wisdom and compassion, that somehow there will be a way to alleviate this patient's suffering. Oftentimes, this stage in their treatment requires several sessions where we just, what I call it, marinating in the mud. We basically just stood there trying to figure out where is this gonna go? And we keep talking and examining and processing what's going on. And one thing that I really appreciate about this part of the process is the listening to the patient's story. And of course, in Shinshu, one of the things we also emphasize is deep listening, meaning listening deeply to the real pain behind their words, the real pain behind their egoic defenses. In my mind, this also reminds me of this concept in Shinshu called Kiho Itai. Kiho Itai, meaning Bumbu and Buddha are inseparable. This is one of my favorite slides. Well, actually, both of these. The first one is a broken bowl that's mended together by liquid gold. And then the second is a sculpture by Paige Bradley called Expansion. And I think it's in New York. And the reason that I really like this, and I think a lot of my patients also relate to this, is that when they see this bowl, this broken bowl, they can relate to how at some point in their lives, especially with traumatic events, they feel like they are broken. In other words, in the course of living, no matter how well we take care of ourselves, we still encounter trauma and injury. And the many forms of dukkha in this lifetime. But we can be glued back together with this liquid gold, like this Japanese ceramic form of kintsugi. And kintsugi, as an art form, basically shows how a mended bowl looks way better than the original bowl before it was broken. And in that sense, we are all broken as well by our dukkha. And the statue basically reminds me of Rumi's poem, "The wound is where the light enters you," meaning that it is in our wounding that Amida Buddha and Amida Buddha's infinite compassion also comes to us without reservation and without discrimination. This submission to the light of the healing light of Amida Buddha certainly requires humility. And a lot of my patients don't really realize what this humility feels like until they are in this abject suffering where they have no escape. And so we talk about how it's a good thing that they realize how their suffering really sucks, because this is the best time to be receptive to the Buddha's compassion that occurs in many forms. And they come to this understanding that it's okay to be miserable and it's okay for this life to suck, because it's not the only thing that exists. Compassion and healing also exist. The next slide is about how we stress ourselves out. In neuroscience, the buzzword now is inflammation. So neuroinflammation, systemic inflammation, right? COVID, there's inflammation all over. But basically, from my Buddhist understanding, stress and inflammation are basically the result of tanha, our desire, our endless thirst for satisfaction. And I put this slide on because I think in order to understand wellness, it's helpful to understand illness and how it happens. At the heart of our misery is stress and inflammation that comes from our insatiable desires. When we become stressed and inflamed, it's because we refuse to see and accept the truth itself as it manifests in this present moment, as if we will triumph and conquer the truth itself, which in my mind is what ignorance essentially represents. And I have to ask some of my patients, if you fight reality itself, who do you think is gonna win? So then we talk about the mind, because in psychiatry, that's pretty much really what we focus on, is the mind. And of course, in the Dhammapada, it states the mind is the forerunner of all actions. So we start with looking at our minds and what it is that we're feeding our minds. And of course, you know, these days with COVID and media and this explosion of information from very polarized and political stations and mass media, it's very hard to know what diet sometimes we put our minds on. So to just kind of narrow it down, we basically have a choice of feeding our minds with something wholesome or unwholesome. And the slide basically says maybe drama and bad news and negativity are bad for the mind, and we should focus more on positivity and discipline and dreams. And I guess for me, from a Buddhist perspective, we can feast our minds on the Dharma, right? And the teachings of the masters, the Abhidharma, the commentaries, right? And really from our Zenji Shikis, our teachers, all the way from Shakyamuni Buddha to Shinran Shonin, the founder of Jodo Shinshu, and Reverend Kyoko Hara Sensei, who's here right with us, who's one of my teachers also. Shinjin Shoin Shomyo Hon, which means Shinjin is the true cause of birth in the Pure Land. Saying the Nembutsu is expressing gratitude for the Buddha's compassion. This is the central teaching in Jodo Shinshu, as I am taught at IBS. This means that following the Nembutsu path is the path of Shinjin. And Shinjin is really very difficult to describe, much less to comprehend. It is beyond comprehension. It's just that wow factor, I suppose, you know, that cannot be put into words. But in my mind, from a mundane medical practice perspective, I call it the mysterious and the potent therapeutic element in the medicine that is embedded in Namo Amida Butsu. This wow factor is what keeps us amazed and enthralled about how amazing we can heal from our misery in spite of ourselves, in spite of our self-destructive behaviors and thoughts. This is the explanation for how we can get beyond our own misery as long as we open our hearts and our minds to the Buddha's compassion that takes on many forms, including antidepressant medication. Saying the Nembutsu, which is an expression of gratitude, is also setting our minds firmly on the truth, the reality of our condition. And if the reality is we suffer, we are sad, we're depressed, we're anxious, we're really scared, then it's okay to see our reality as it is. This particular approach actually has been described in Marsha Linehan's dialectical behavior therapy. She's a Zen practitioner, and one of the modules in her training is distress tolerance. From my perspective, from a Jodo Shinshu perspective, this is a perfect way of illustrating how when we sit with our suffering, with our anguish, we are basically sitting with Amida's compassion as well, with enlightenment itself. And of course, it's going to take time for things to transform, for our minds to be transformed from being corrupted with our greed and anger to a mind of humility and gratitude. So to say Namo Amida Butsu is basically setting our minds firmly on the Buddha. It's concentrating on the Buddha. And as long as we can fill our minds with the compassion of the Buddha, there is comfort there. There's transformation there. I remember I have this one patient recently with this horrible, miserable anxiety from childhood PTSD. He texted me the other day. It took him about 62 years to get to this point, right? And he asked me, how do you spell Namo Amida Butsu? So I spelled it for him. He said, I'd like to have it engraved to put on my desk, so that he can keep thinking of the Buddha, right? This is my last slide as a conclusion. And it's one of my favorites. Basically, it says, one day, someone is going to hug you so tight that all of your broken pieces will stick back together. In my mind, this represents how the Buddha's compassion heals us and glues us back together like kintsugi, okay? And although health and wellness is there, it does not mean that we are disease-free. To the contrary, we are necessarily wounded and broken, so that hugs feel really good. So thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Carmela Sensei. ありがとうございました. Yeah, such a wonderful presentation. Okay, so now we would like to move on to the next speaker, Tomon Sensei. So before she starts, let me briefly introduce Sensei. Dr. Tomon Lisa Mar is a Soto Zen priest who trained with Reverend Tonem O'Neill at the Milwaukee Zen Center and received the Dharma transmission in 2012. She is also palliative medicine physician, receiving specialty training at Harvard, Massachusetts General Hospital in 2002-2003. She studied adult palliative care team at the University of New Mexico in 2008, where she is currently professor of internal medicine and division chief of palliative medicine. She lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico with her husband, and also finds joy in sumie painting and then woodblock printing. Thank you, Sensei. よろしくお願いします.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, Okay. Hi, yes, as the introduction, first off, that was a wonderful talk, Carmela-san. I really enjoyed that. It's very beautiful. And I think we're going to intersect in our talks today too. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what palliative care is, and then talk about some situations with healthcare in the US now, as well as Buddhist teachings that impact healthcare and well-being. And I would say my well-being as well, as I navigate through the day working to take care of patients and families. So I'm a palliative care physician, as was noted. The hospital I work at is the University of New Mexico Hospital in Albuquerque. It's a safety net hospital, meaning we care for anyone, whether they can pay or not. And it's the only level 1 trauma center, which means the sickest of the sick come to the hospital. So if you had a severe trauma or neurologic problems or things, they come there. And it's also an interesting place, and it's the top academic hospital for Native American admissions. So we have 19 Pueblo tribes and the Navajo and Apache nations, and it's just been fascinating being here. And Tonin O'Connor, as was mentioned, is my teacher, and my home temple is the Milwaukee Zen Center. So what is palliative care? A lot of people don't know the term, but it's a new subspecialty of medical care that's designed to alleviate suffering. That's the goal. Physical, emotional, spiritual, social, existential, for patients and their families when they're facing life-threatening illness. Because the goal is to alleviate suffering of these patients, we go everywhere in the hospital. We're in the emergency department and the neuro-intensive care unit and primary care, et cetera, et cetera. So it's pretty fast-paced. And it's provided by a team. And really, no one person has all the skills to address all those issues. And so we need a team of doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, social workers, chaplains, and others that work together to make one care plan for a patient. It's provided for people with serious or life-threatening illness, no matter what stage they're in. And it's different than hospice in that it's not just end-of-life care, and often is more upstream. So for instance, we may get involved when a patient is just diagnosed with a new cancer and they're having a lot of pain, or lost their insurance, or they're suffering emotionally. And we get involved, we may take a more active role as things move on, but you don't have to choose between what we do and traditional medical care. So we work very closely and collaborate with the traditional medical care that people receive. I just wanted to show a couple quotes, which I think summarize how I see hospice and palliative care. This is Cicely Saunders, the mother of the modern hospice movement. And I love this quote because it encapsulates how we approach the work we do. She said, "You matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life. We will do all we can, not only to help you die peacefully, but also to live until you die." And mostly hospice is home-based. Hospice care is home-based. And this wonderful Dr. Balfour Mount, who is a Canadian physician, said, well, this is really great, but I think we need to bring this idea of care into the hospital itself, because frankly, many people die in the hospital as opposed to at home. And so I love he's a surgeon, and really the founder of palliative care. And he said, whole person care requires a whole person. Until one comes along, use your team, because we can never have all those skills. And I think similar to what Carmela-san was saying, he also said healing is the central goal of life. I'm not speaking of physical healing. A person can die healed. What I mean by healing is a shift in our quality of life away from anguish and suffering towards an experience of integrity, wholeness, and inner peace. And so our team tries to provide the space and presence for that to happen with patients and their families when they're very sick. This is my team in 2019, no masks. And we were quite happy then because it was pre-pandemic. I'm in the background there if you can see, but yeah, and we've had it's been a real roller coaster since that time, starting in March 2020, as everyone knows. And so this is the whole team that we rely on. It's actually gotten bigger since then, so we keep growing and growing. So when I think about the SDGs and the concept of leaving no one behind, I'm going to try to get this out. I think that the thing to understand is that when I looked at this, can you all see all my slides, or do you see my bar of people? I'll maybe move it up there. Okay, I think we're good. But they're all linked, right? They're all interconnected. You really can't have health and well-being if you don't have clean water and sanitation, if you don't have reduced inequalities, if you don't have affordable clean energy. This looked to me like a representation of Indra's net. So I think the UN was really brilliant in how they looked at all these areas, potential realms of suffering, but they're interdependent. It's like Indra's net. So that concept of the net, where at each intersection is a bright jewel, and we're all those bright jewels, and we're constantly reflecting with everyone and everything around us in this fabric of life. And occasionally we try to pull ourselves out and think, I don't need all those folks, I don't need the whatever, and we just get swapped back right into the net eventually, because we're all interconnected, and that's just the way it is. But I think that for me, I think our palliative team as well, it's a very interdependent team. And I think we need to do more in medical care that is based on that. And I just want to throw that's out, diseasing, but disease is really whatever is making you ill. And illness is that process of living with the disease, where suffering can occur in any realm, physiological, psychological, spiritual, emotional, existential. And as Carmela-san said, good health and well-being are not just freedom from disease, but that's how our medical system often approaches things. We take a more reactive approach to disease and not a preventive. And I think preventative. In fact, palliative care is good care. It's good whole person care. Why don't we have that type of care earlier before people get serious and life-threatening illness? The other thing is that we often throw the terms, pain and suffering together, but pain and suffering are not necessarily the same thing. And that's a problem sometimes in my medical setting, where people will say, well, we took his physical pain away. Why is he still suffering? And it's like, well, he's dying, he has lost his home, his daughter is sick, et cetera. So it's sort of this reductionist model of medicine to sort of pull everything apart. We try to see where's the suffering, and then who in the team can help with that. And I'm going to say something a little bit maybe controversial, but whenever as I've been going through, especially the last 2.5 years with the pandemic, I constantly think that our healthcare system, if the goal of
It's great hate and delusion. Take us greed. Take us hate and it's a month.
Oh, could someone mute, please? Uh-oh, I think I'm freezing. Hold on one second. Can you hear me? No, okay. I'm gonna go into a different room because I think my screen is freezing. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. I don't think the healthcare, if that was our goal of our healthcare system, I'm not really sure that we would have the system that we have now, which has a profit motive and often. And so I feel like as I look at the SDGs, we need to really, in the US, think about what is the system that's going to do the best for the most people, not the most money for those people. And I think that, the healthcare providers, as you've probably read in the paper, there's a lot of burnout, a lot of people retiring early, a lot of people quitting medical care, nursing care altogether. And I sometimes feel that we strive to provide good health care despite the system that we're in rather than because of it. And we've been having, I would say, even before the pandemic, a lot of training on the concept of resilience, meaning we need to be more resilient to work in our systems. And a lot of it is often, here's resilience is not just up to you as an individual. Of course, a lot of it is, but it's not just up to you. And you can't yoga your way out, is what people say, which I agree with. However, whenever the recommendations come about resilience, they usually are focused on the person, not the system. And so that's why I really feel that we need universal health care in the US, because, and I had a sort of naive concept that might have happened with the pandemic, but it hasn't. I know at our hospital, we've never gone below 130% full. And so since the pandemic, we've got people in hall beds, 2 people in ICU beds, not in the bed, but in the room. And it's just been it's never really let up, at least where I am. And I think that pressure on the system is going to continue. So one of the things I have found really helpful is Eihei Dogen's Genjo Koan. When I think about, I was at the hospital once, walking down the hall and feeling a lot of responsibility that I had to help everybody, and I had to sort of go and unfold things ahead of me. And we were, I think, studying Genjo Koan at that time, which in the summary, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study that self, though, is to forget my little self. And to forget this little self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of this enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. It gave me an insight that I didn't have to go out and unfold everything. I could sit back, try to see things as clearly as I can, keep scrubbing my glasses so I can see things clearly, and then respond to what is in front of me as opposed to reacting to everything. And so with that approach, that really has helped me with my wellness, in the sense that I can, then you're just sort of, as my teacher says, you're doing the next thing, just do the next thing, do the next thing. It's sort of that hand reaching out, the Avalokiteshvara concept, when it's like reaching behind your head for the pillow at night. You're just sort of doing what needs to be done, as opposed to ruminating and trying to fit things where maybe they shouldn't be, if that makes sense. And I feel like the Buddha's teaching, the Dharma, are this healing rain that comes down on us. I think healthcare needs to be that as well, where we have access for everybody, no matter who they are, no matter what their ethnicity, their race, their economic level, their gender. And I love the lines in the Lotus Sutra that talk about this rain, which is like the Buddha's healing and the Buddha's love. The rain falls everywhere, coming down on all sides, flowing everywhere without limit, reaching over the face of the earth, into the hidden recesses of mountains, streams, and steep valleys where plants and trees grow, in medicinal herbs, big trees and small, 100 grains, rice seedlings, sugarcane, and grapevines. All are moistened by that rain and abundantly enriched. The dry ground is soaked, and both herbs and trees flourish. By the same the same water that comes from that cloud, plants, trees, I think that's thickets and forests, according to their needs, receive the moisture, and all the trees, superior, middling, or inferior, each according to its size, grow and develop. So in other words, that sort of universal of having that the Dharma always with us, the teachings always with us. It's like being nourished when we're thirsty, being given something to drink when we're thirsty. And so, and in the Lotus Sutra as well, the Buddhist unbiased teaching is like one rain of one flavor. So it goes to everybody. And in the Vimalakirti Sutra, which Tonin and I have been reading together, the beautiful compassion of the Buddha when everyone joins to hear him speak, and it's hot, and everyone comes with a parasol, but then they put their parasols down to in order to listen. And then he thinks, I'm not going to have people sit in this hot on this hot ground while I'm talking. And he makes this massive canopy for everybody, this jeweled canopy to sit under. And I think that's what the Dharma is for us, and what the teachings are for us, or this canopy to be under, and to feel that support from the Buddha, from our Sangha, and from the teachings. I can't read the bottom there. Yeah, okay. And then I think a lot about Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. You know, she's not, or he is not the fixer of the world. You know, we think about, you know, she's the regarder of the cries of the world, the hearer of the cries of the world. And you may have the understanding of the story where she was trying to pull everybody out of the hell realms, and she was just got the last person out, and then all of a sudden she turned back and looked, and there were millions of people had already fallen back into the hell realms. And so her head exploded, and the compassionate God said, okay, we're going to give you 9 heads and 1,000 arms in order to do your work. And so this idea of you know, the frustration when you're trying to do things, but then to have all these hands with an eye at the hand, just to do that call and response, do the next thing that needs to be done. What I really love about it is that not all the heads up at the top are really happy and compassionate looking. There's a couple that are like, you know, really like mean, because sometimes compassion isn't always kind and, you know, you're wonderful and everything's okay. So I really love that. And then I think in the drawing to the right, we see her hearing. This is what, you know, what we do. And I think just like Carmela-san said about her work in psychiatry, it's the main thing that we do, is to listen. There's the quote of don't just stand there, do something. And we say in palliative care, don't just do something, stand there and listen and see what the suffering is and how can we help that. And I think that compassion is really a verb. We're compassioning in the sense. I think a lot of times in medicine, people have ideas of, oh, that's a compassionate person, that's not. I don't think it's something that you have or don't have. I don't think it's something you give to people. You know, you're up here and you give them that. I think it's seeing people who they are, listening to them, see them as a person, a unique person, and how can we help them. And I also think it's showing up and trying. You know, it's not necessarily some big, like I just rescued, you know, 3,000 people on the coast of so-and-so during a tsunami. It can be that you said hi to somebody, that you looked them in the eye, you saw them, and you felt their heart, and you felt that connection with them. So those are some thoughts, somewhat random, but I hope that was interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sensei. ありがとうございました。Such a informative, wonderful presentation talk. Okay, so